This week on Mindful Headlines, an intimate conversation with my colleague and friend, Roberta Romero, about a topic that takes tremendous courage to speak about: addiction to alcohol. We've heard of Dry January, where many people abstain from alcohol for a month. Maybe you're giving it a try. There can be benefits like really exploring your relationship with alcohol and deciding if you can develop healthier habits. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found alcohol consumption increased 14% compared to before the pandemic, with women increasing their heavy drinking days 41%.
I was drinking daily, red wine. I was hiding it.
But the other side of the story is recovery, the countless people who have reached rock bottom, gotten back up, and have led happier lives without alcohol.
We can and do get well.
That includes Roberta, who we all affectionately call Bert at King 5 News. She's a journalist, wife, and mother. She's also a recovering alcoholic, 18 years sober.
It is the first thing I think about now. It is the first thing that I keep in touch, the first thing that I put on my list before my children, before my husband, before my job. My sobriety comes first, because I have none of that without my sobriety.
She's kind, funny, a community leader, and she's not afraid to share her journey.
I am a person who believes that it is important for me to tell my story and share my story, because there's so much stigma around alcoholism and addiction. And I'm going to speak for myself. When I thought of an alcoholic, I thought of a person living under a bridge, drinking out of a brown paper bag. I never thought that I have a marriage, I have a job, I have a home. I'm an alcoholic. So there's this sort of distinction to kind of say, well, I can't be because I'm functioning.
I hope you enjoy listening to our very candid conversation. And if you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please see our show notes. There's a list of resources available to you, many right here in Western Washington.
Roberta, thanks for being a part of the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Since the day I met you, Jessica, I've been impressed. I love you as a journalist, and I love you as a friend. So I feel very lucky to be here.
Thank you for your support. It really does mean a lot. And thank you for being here today. We're going to talk a little bit about your recovery from addiction to alcohol. And I know it's a really difficult topic, so I'm so grateful for you for being so open. You've always been a really open person since the day I met you, and then in the newsroom when we talk about things as well. So I think this will really help and benefit a lot of people. So tell me a little bit about your story and how your relationship with alcohol began.
First, thank you. I am a person who believes that it is important for me to tell my story and share my story, because there's so much stigma around alcoholism and addiction, especially in this day and age when we see a lot of it in the streets with our homeless, our unhoused, and people have a very different idea of it. And most importantly, I want people to know there's a different side. Yes, there's alcoholism addiction, but there's another thing called recovery. We can and do get well. And, I always want to, I think also, and I'm going to speak for myself. When I thought of an alcoholic, I thought of a person living under a bridge, drinking out of a brown paper bag. I never thought that I have a marriage, I have a job, I have a home. I'm an alcoholic. So there's this sort of distinction to kind of say, well, I can't be because I'm functioning. And what I've learned is I actually feel sorriest for the functioning alcoholics. It's hard. It's really hard work. And so my story, I'll have to go back a bit. I was always a binge drinker, and I'm older. So in the 80s, and I graduated in 1982, it was just a given. You drank. You went to football games and you drank, and you went to a party and you drank, or you went to a dance and you drink before you go to the dance. And then there's also just the social things with your parents. If you went to a wedding, if you go to a funeral, alcohol is just a fabric of our world. And there was zero education around it. I had no idea there was such a thing as alcoholism or recovery. I just knew everybody drank. So I binge drank, and it was never out of control. I could stop it.
Okay.
So I went through college, and, it was after I graduated that I still was able to control it. I would binge drink, but I didn't do it every day. There was no problem with it. And I'll tell you, I'm going to fast forward to career at King 5. I had a 3-year-old son. I gave birth to twin daughters. I'm at home, and I'm sure there was some postpartum depression there. I am far from my family, living in Seattle. There was no place to turn for help. So there I am, this new mom, 3 kids under the age of 3, no one to turn to. And I started drinking red wine. At the end of the day, of course I deserved it. It was really hard. And it's sort of that talk that you say in that culture that we all just, mommy juice, people love to say that. And it just, oh, it's so cringy. So I started having red wine. And then I don't know, I always think of that tipping point. When did it tip into this? This is odd. This is too much. And I look back on it and there's this feral part of my brain that I knew. I don't remember saying it out loud. I don't remember consciously thinking it, but I knew this looks weird. I need to start hiding it. Like my husband is going to know, like drinking before he got home, because I knew if we had a glass of wine, I needed more. So I drink a glass of wine before he ever walked in, but he didn't know that. So there's these weird little brain gymnastics you do to get around it so it doesn't seem weird, but you're in it before you know it. And then hiding it, and then trying to buy it, and then trying to not overdrink, not underdrink, getting rid of the empties.
Okay.
You don't have any idea how difficult it is to get rid of empty wine bottles, wrapping, so I'd throw them away and they'd clank. So then I'd start wrapping them in newspaper so they wouldn't clank. Just those things that you don't even know what goes into being an active alcoholic. And then on top of it, the depression, the shame, the guilt, knowing that, I wasn't able to cope. So I've got this high-powered career. I want to say high-powered, but a very intense career as a journalist, being a wife, a mother, all of those things rolled into one. And all of a sudden I'm drinking every day and then I'm hiding it. So there I'm at. Then it becomes a problem. And my husband and I call it the dance. He'd come home and he'd try to give me rules. He'd be the nice guy. Just don't drink alone. Or let's just cut back, and I'd say, of course. And of course, I just went deeper underground. Then you do the anger. You have to stop. Then we get in the fights, so it was just this sort of dance, until, and this was when the internet was fairly new. He went online and found a letter to write someone. And I will always remember this day. I'm waking up, I'm hungover. I'm scared. You don't sleep well when you drink like that. And he said, I have to talk to you. And he wrote out a letter. And for whatever reason, it resonated with me. However, that was in October. My sober date is January 2nd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you told me that. And it's been 18 years. Is that correct?
On January 2nd, I celebrated 18 years of recovery.
Congratulations.
And here's where I want to say, so you fall into this black hole, you're really sick, you're scared, and now it's up to me to now find the help. If you were a cancer patient, you would get, every doctor would jump on board with you. Your family would jump on board with you. Your friends would start, making you casseroles. But me, I had to by myself try and find help. So I'm looking, and it was hard, and I'm a reporter. I know how to search. I could not find it. And then, is this a good place? Is this a bad place? Do I want inpatient? Do I want outpatient? What does that even mean? So I had to struggle through that. Luckily, I started going to 12-step meetings. And it was there that someone talked to me about a place called Residence 12, which is an all-women's treatment center in Kirkland, Washington, right in my backyard. And I actually feel very strongly about gender-specific treatment. So I went there, and for the first time, I was really honest. I'd done assessments. I had done a few things, but I went there and I felt safe, and I told her the truth. I was drinking daily, red wine. I was hiding it. And she, you have to have a buy-in. A lot of people, especially if it's their kids, they want to just go to treatment. But if they're not going to go and, and do it, so you usually have to hit a bottom. And I hit a very high bottom. I'm very lucky, and I had rules around it. I never drank and drive. I never, I had a lot of rules around it too. So I had a very high bottom, and she said, well, what do you think? And I think I need treatment. And she said, yes, you do. So, she needed me to admit it. And so it was October, and I decided I needed to have the holidays because I didn't want my kids to be without me on the holidays. Can I tell you how wonderful those holidays were? Because I was still drinking. I was still hiding it. And my last drink was New Year's Day. And I'm very, very grateful that it was horrible. It was horrible. We had some friends over. I set my husband out on a stupid errand, and we had this really nice bottle of wine that I never touched, and I drank it all by myself before anybody got there. So it started with that. My friends came over. We were playing games. This is all I remember at the end of the night. I was in the bathroom. I was getting sick. My husband was pounding on the door. We're both crying. Luckily, the kids were asleep. There's impact. I'm not going to lie, and I have to own that. And I make living amends in other ways. It was horrible. And I'm very grateful for that, because it's easy to romanticize alcohol. It's easy to say, you know what? I've gone a whole year without drinking. Maybe it wasn't that bad. And I can just remember that night, and I know.
Wow. I was going to ask you, and you've kind of answered it, but maybe you can walk me through the process of, you said your husband wrote you a letter, and you had this somewhat of an aha moment, but how it took you those several months to really say, okay, this is it, I'm going to do it, right? Even after you had sought that recovery. And I'm sure a lot of people that have struggled with addiction can relate to that, just not quite saying, I'm fully committed quite yet. So what made that progress?
That is such an insightful question, Jessica, and I don't think anybody's ever asked me. We call them normal drinkers, normies. I don't think a normie's ever asked me that question. And that is so smart, whether I'm the person who's an alcoholic struggling or the person who loves the alcoholic, because it's a family disease. We all fall into it, everybody. So here's the bottom line. I did not want to stop drinking. It's all I knew. It was my coping mechanism. It was my friend. It, and I look back on it, a lot of it was just boredom. You're kind of by yourself. And so it was all I knew. I could not imagine my life without alcohol. I literally could not imagine it. And then, I know that I did, and I know a lot of us do this. We imagine it being sober, and you think, great. So on Christmas, when everybody's toasting, or wedding, everybody's toasting, and I don't get to toast. No, like you put all these things in front of it because you don't want to stop drinking. It's all I know. It's a very good question, and I have to think about this a little bit. So I didn't want to stop drinking. I had to come to the moment. I had to educate myself a little bit and understand why it was necessary, because I wanted to sort of make it work both ways. I wanted to make my husband happy, and I wanted to still drink. Here's the thing. If you knew me back then, Jessica, you wouldn't know. I suited up and showed up. I had a very good mask.
I wanted to get your reflection on some of the headlines that we've had throughout the pandemic, and that is an increase in alcohol sales and more people drinking, and particularly women, and just wanted to get your opinion on why that might be.
It is a fact that alcohol consumption, I don't know if it tripled, but it certainly went way up, surprisingly or not surprisingly. There are two things that I saw happen. It was odd when the shutdown happened. All of a sudden, everybody's schedules were gone, and I'm working from home, and it's kind of fun. And I'm not driving, and I'm also scared. Am I going to have a job? What's going on with the world? So there were two things. Like, it's sort of fun and weird and odd and vacation-y because I'm at home, so I'm drinking alcohol. And then I am scared. There was a lot of fear around this. What's going on? Am I going to get sick? My loved ones. So there's that kind of dual thing. So you start drinking, and then it just becomes a habit. And then all of a sudden, remember what I talked about, that tipping point? You're in it. And it doesn't look odd because everybody's doing it, and there's excuses for it, and there's logic around it even. Zoom parties where we'd all get together and drink. Oh, that was it made me sad when I saw that.
Yes.
I remember, but it was social.
And I remember, yeah, it was social, but it was this weird thing because I went to a few, and as you know, I was constantly going into the studio. So I was blessed with the ability to still go into my workplace. And for someone that was here in Seattle and knew, it was really a great thing that despite the pandemic, I was able to go see some coworkers, even if it was just a handful of people. But I remember partaking in some virtual parties because they were birthday parties or baby showers, etc. And you would be on Zoom and you'd have a glass of wine or a cocktail or something. And then the party would be over and you'd be by yourself. And it was such an odd feeling. And I'm not someone who drinks during the week or at home by myself. And so then I just remember thinking, but now I'm home by myself and doing this. And to your point, I could see how it was a really slippery slope for a lot of folks.
Exactly. And, and then you're in it before you know it.
Are you happier now?
Unbelievably happy. You know why? Happiness is a choice, not a feeling. I choose happiness. You get to make it, or you can be really angry and unhappy. You can choose that. Absolutely. I can't afford it. I cannot afford it because that will lead me right back to alcohol.
This week on Mindful Headlines, Seahawks legend Doug Baldwin. You may know him for his skills as a wide receiver on the football field, including that Seahawks Super Bowl win in 2014. But today he talks to me about why he does so much volunteer work across Western Washington and an upcoming community barbecue in Renton that he's hosting with the United Way.
This is just an opportunity for us to gather as a community, to just be together and enjoying activities, to smile, to laugh, to have fun. And I think our society, our collective being on this planet that's tumbling through space, by the way, I feel we all need that. We all need that connection again.
We also talk about what drives him, the influence his grandmother has had on his life, his Champions of Change initiative, and even his thoughts on the recent shooting in Uvalde, Texas.
After my rage and my sadness and all of that kind of subsided enough for me to take a step back and look at this more objectively, the question that came to my mind was, what happened to that young man? What happened to him that he felt the desire and the need to do what he did? And what happened to the systems that are supposedly in place that he fell through? I'm frustrated all around with the lack of urgency when it comes to taking care of our younger generation so that when they grow up and they're 18 years old, that they don't make terrible decisions, that they have the empathy and the compassion to think about other people's lives and want to make positive impact.
We talk about the deep faith that guides him every day, a reason he wants to make our community a better place to live and raise his kids, including his next child on the way. Hope you like our conversation, and you'll find links and information for the United Way barbecue, where you can meet Doug, and the Champions of Change events in our show notes.
Doug, thanks for being a part of the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we got connected through the United Way, and I know there's a community barbecue coming up very soon where some of your fans can meet you. Folks from the community can get out there and just mingle, get to know each other, and have fun. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's exactly what you just mentioned. So June 18th, we're having the community barbecue, and it's just that. It's a gathering opportunity for friends, family, neighbors to get together, enjoy some good food and some fun activities, and just hang out. The past few years, we've been dealing with a lot in our society, and we've been isolated at times as well. And so this is to me, it's just a perfect transition from coming out of those past few years, getting together as a community and building community once again.
You do a lot of work with United Way and other organizations around the community, right? So I know that it's important to be a part of the community. So tell me a little bit about what drives you in that regard.
Well, I grew up in a community that was very similar to the Renton area in this region in general. And so when you talk about being involved in the community, it's just something that I'm used to.
Obviously, we're talking today a little bit about your community service and your work in the Seattle and Puget Sound area, but people know you from football. Obviously, you're a Seahawks legend, very successful football career. How has that shaped your mindset going forward, right? It takes a lot of dedication to be that kind of athlete. And I'm sure that you're speaking about tenacity in your girls and in your grandmother. And you obviously must have some of your own tenacity to kind of set your goals and go forward. And how does that translate into your community service and the life you're leading right now?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost with my daughters, right, and family in general, as I'm building a family and still have a lot on my plate. There's challenges that come with that. But I look at my daughters, and the only thing they really care about is knowing that they're loved. And I'm focused on that. And the lessons that I learned through life, and particularly through football, was that when you create a culture and environment where people feel seen, recognized, loved, and valued, you're able to do incredible things. You know, we won a Super Bowl, went to another one that we should have won, but that's a story for another day. Being in that culture and understanding the impact that actually seeing and being in relationship, being connected with my family, obviously, with Champions of Change, with my work with United Way, right? The most important aspect of everything we do is that we make sure we see the folks that we're working with, right? Now, that's really hard and really challenging to do at times, and we don't get it right by any means, but that's the premise of all the work that we do. And if we do that, even when we fail, even when we get it wrong, if we're doing that, if we're aimed in that direction, we'll have more wins than losses. And I'm fairly confident about that.
This week on Mindful Headlines, the war in Ukraine.
It's hard emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's very hard.
I talked to Valery Goloborodko. He's not only from Ukraine with family still there, he's also honorary consul to Ukraine in Western Washington.
Here in United States, in Washington State, we try to do our best as well. We look for opportunities to stand together and to support people of Ukraine in their fights. They're very courageous and very sacrificial.
We talk about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a crisis getting deadlier by the day. Already, there have been nearly 500 civilian casualties, nearly 1,000 people hurt. And meanwhile, more than 2 million have fled Ukraine. About half of those refugees are children. We know there will be more refugees and more deaths because there seems to be no end in sight for this conflict. Valery and I recorded our conversation on Tuesday, March 8th, and already things have changed since then, some positive and some negative developments. You'll hear him ask for major companies like McDonald's and Starbucks to stop doing business in Russia. I can now report both companies are part of a growing list to do so. We also discuss the airstrikes against civilians, and since our recording, a maternity and children's hospital was bombed in Mariupol. There are also new fears Russia could potentially be preparing to use chemical or biological weapons in Ukraine. Here's our conversation and ways you can help.
Valery, thanks for being a part of the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and for giving me an opportunity to share about what's happening in Ukraine.
Let me first begin by asking how you're doing and how your loved ones are doing.
I like to be on optimistic side, and I would like to say that I'm doing good, but it's hard to say that I'm doing good. At the same time, we have food on our table. Our kids are at school. Sky above us is peaceful. We have water. We have warmth at our houses. And there is no direct threat that somebody will be shooting at us. So it's blessings that we have here in United States, but my heart has no peace.
And how much contact do you have with anyone in Ukraine right now or anyone that's fled the country?
I talk to, of course, I talk to my colleagues, to my friends, to my classmates, to my family that is in Ukraine. I try to call at least a few of them every day. I can't call all of them at the same time, but at least one or two of them every day to ask how they're doing, how are their families, and what else we can do here from United States to help them and to show that we are standing with them. So pretty much every day, and sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about the war itself later in the podcast, but since we're talking about it, and I think the most important question for people listening in Western Washington is how can we help? What can we do? And we've seen the protests, we've seen the rallies. Seattle's Mayor Bruce Harrell just yesterday announcing an executive order saying we will help refugees when they come to the Seattle area. We will help them emotionally. We will help them with finances, etc. But what can we do right now as the war is very much in the middle of it? It doesn't seem like things are going to be ending anytime soon.
So today, President Biden announced ban on Russian oil. That's very important and good move. We appreciate that. And every dollar spent for products made in Russia, portion of that dollar goes to buy bullets to kill people, innocent people in Ukraine and around the world. So first of all, we need to stop buying products made in Russia. There are corporations that are still doing business in Russia, and I would like to name few of them, like McDonald's and Starbucks. We want to see those corporations to stand for freedom, to stand for democracy, to stand for values in action, to stand for values that they declare and they preach. We appreciate everything United States is doing. United States is doing much more than was done in 2014. And as Ukrainian community of Washington State, as Ukrainians, on behalf of Ukrainians that live in Ukraine, I would like to say thank you. But at the same time, we understand that there is more that can be done. And we want those steps to be done before it's too late.
I do want to ask you, you said that you have no peace of mind right now, that you and your family may be physically okay right now because you're in the United States, but obviously you're watching everything that is happening overseas. How are you dealing with that emotionally, mentally, and how are you talking to your children about what's happening?
It's hard emotionally, mentally, spiritually, it's very hard. And there are moments when I just want somebody, a friend of mine, to sit near with me, to put his hand on my shoulder and just to pray with me, because emotionally and spiritually it's very hard. My wife, it's very hard on her. She's pregnant right now, and she's helping a lot with emails and phone calls, because so many emails from people, and I can't catch up on reading those emails and responding to many of them. So she's helping me, and kids are doing posters for rallies. We go to rallies together. One of the first questions when this attack started was, we have classmates that are Russians. What should we do now? My wife and I, we invited them to sit at the table, at our dining table, and we had conversation about this, that we are not, our fight is not against all the Russians. Our fight is against evil spirit of Putin, KGB, communism, and Nazi. That's what is driving Putin, and that's what is driving this war.
Is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to share, or anything that you just want people to be aware of as the fighting continues in Ukraine, ways that people here locally can help or just be in tune with the Ukrainian community? We have a really large Ukrainian community here in Washington State. I think it's the 5th largest in the country. So anything that people can do and be aware of.
Please keep praying for Ukraine, for our army. They are very courageous, but that mental, spiritual, physical burden, they have to carry it, and they need support, and they need prayers.
Thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing some of your thoughts, and obviously my thoughts with you and the entire Ukrainian community. Thanks for being a part of this today.
Thank you, Jessica.
You've been listening to the Mindful Headlines podcast. There's a link to the Facebook page for the Honorary Consulate of Ukraine, Valeri told me their webpage had been hacked, so for now, just a link to Facebook. I also encourage you to keep up with the war in Ukraine through a variety of news sites, and you can always go to king5.com for the latest headlines, especially local efforts in Western Washington. I'm Jessica Janner Castro. Thanks for listening this week.